Hello, a warm welcome to CREST.BD's Bipolar Wellness Center webinar series. This webinar will provide you with a summary of current research evidence about the interplay between relationships and quality of life, as well as pointing you to some tools and resources to help you flourish in your relationships.
Hi, I'm Sheri Johnson. I'm a member of CREST.BD, and I'm a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, where I direct the Mania program. Today I'm going to be talking with you about relationships and bipolar disorder. I have a few goals. I want to talk with you about why relationships and social support are so important and how they're defined. I want to talk really about why these matter so much to your quality of life. I want to talk about some specific issues that happen for people with bipolar disorder and their relationships, and how you can take action. Let's start with definitions. We all know that human beings are social by nature. We can survive on our own, but we truly thrive when we're surrounded by supportive others. Even contact through distant and casual relationships, like shop owners, librarians, pharmacists, can provide social support. The total set of your relationships would often be described as your social support system. What's important here is to think about the idea that social support can involve many different kinds of resources. So one important resource would be emotional support, having a sense of being loved, receiving compassion. But yet a different resource would be informational support. Do you have somebody you could turn to who would give you advice? Tangible support might involve help with day-to-day needs. So there are many different kinds of resources, and you might end up receiving those resources from just one person or from a whole set of different people in your life. So why do these relationships matter so much for quality of life? We know that social support is linked to physical health. We can see effects on immune function, stress hormones, cardiovascular function, a host of medical conditions. But also we can see strong psychological benefits. Living in close contact with somebody clearly reduces isolation and loneliness. Now, how much social support a person thinks they have may make more of a difference to their well-being than the actual amount of support they have. That is, the key question to ask yourself is, do I have the level of social support and the types of social support that are important to me? What's important in bipolar disorder is to understand that many people with bipolar disorder experience a sense of having low social support. Sometimes they report that both their close and distant relationships can feel somehow unavailable or inadequate. Even between episodes, people with bipolar disorder report that they often have less contact with their friends and less contact than they would want to have. Some research says that people with bipolar disorder can feel more sensitive to rejection. And the quality of relationships in bipolar disorder is important to the sense of self-esteem. People who feel more connected and more supported also report feeling a higher sense of self-worth and more confidence. We think this probably has some developmental pattern over the life course, and that the people who've had many more lifetime mood episodes, and particularly more manic episodes, often report the most challenges with their social support. Building that social support is really important. We know that when people have bipolar disorder, having better social support can predict faster recovery from mood episodes. It can predict a better sense of overall functioning, fewer weeks of mood episodes in a year, and it seems particularly powerful for reducing depression. So many, many reasons in bipolar disorder to build your social support network. One caveat that's important is that not all relationships are helpful. So one of the things that's been shown in the research literature is that family interaction styles that are really critical and hostile and intrusive or over-involved can predict higher rates of relapse. They also can predict lower overall functioning and longer episodes. So on the whole, relationships can provide support, but be careful because those with a lot of conflict can add to your stress, so a sort of double-edged sword. What this really means is we want to bolster your social support, but make sure it's not very conflictual, hostile, critical relationship moments that you're experiencing. All right, so let's talk, now that we've discussed how important this is, let's talk about some actions you can take. I really think the first step you want to do is to assess your own social support network. Keep in mind, social support comes in many shapes and sizes. There are lots of different ways that people build the social support network that they want to have. And so you want to keep an open mind for all the possibilities for relationships. Let's begin with the most important question, though. I think what you need to do is ask yourself what your ideal social life looks like. Are you happy with the level of close relationships? Are you happy with the number of people that you could call and say, let's go see a movie? Think about the different functions of social support and whether you're content with the level you have in those different areas. The real question is, how close are your actual relationships and social life to your ideal vision of those relationships and social life? Some of you are going to look at it and say, I love my social world, everything's where I want it to be. But for almost everybody, there's ways in which our social network is dissimilar to our ideal. And that means it's time to take some steps. So one thing to do is make relationship building a priority. Really make this a part of day-to-day or week-to-week life to think about, what could I do a little differently? And then let's think about some of the steps you could take. You can do things like make your social meetings regular. So, for example, you might have a friend you enjoy walking with occasionally. You might talk with that friend about walking at the same time each week. Think about whether there are some of your activities that you can combine with socializing. So, for example, maybe what you want to do is cook with somebody, or carpool with somebody, or exercise with somebody. What are the rituals you already have in your life where you might just add another person? As you're thinking about how to build better closeness and togetherness, I think one of the critical pieces here is to allow that to unfold, but not to get too demanding of it, not too pushing of it. Sometimes people will join you for these events, and they'll welcome more closeness. Other people end up having lives that are a bit full, and that's okay. So I think the balance is to try and be vulnerable, open, and accepting, so you give the space for intimacy to develop. Focusing in some other ways on what to do if your actual social network is dissimilar to your ideal, let's talk about some other possible steps. One thing to think about is, are your friendships balanced? So in the most perfect of friendships, there's this nice balance between giving and receiving. There may be moments when we want more support from others, but then ideally we turn around and we give something back. Other times we have friendships where we feel like we're giving and we're not receiving something back, and we need to tune that if we really want our friendships to be nurturant to us. One way to cope with kind of building your social network in a better way is to nurture and build a variety of relationships instead of just relying on one person for support. So these are just some of the ideas about how to rebalance things, but one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do is to set something called SMART goals, which are very concrete and specific. Instead of, oh, I want to create an ideal social network, think about the next step of what you can do and make a commitment to that. So let's expand this idea of SMART for a minute, because I think it's a great game plan. Lots of research says if you want to get to a kind of big picture goal, you want to start with setting smaller, reasonable goals. Make your goals specific. So what's one thing I could do this week that would be nice for my social world? I could call a friend and ask them to a movie. I could join a new volunteer group. But make it something that's so specific you know what, how, where, and when. Make it measurable. It shouldn't just be, oh, I'm going to work to feel closer to people. Maybe it would be that you would share a more personal story with somebody that you already like. Think ahead to how acceptable the goal is. In other words, are you going to feel good when it's done? Realistic is really important here. So can you do it? Can you do it without sacrificing too much? Don't make the goals so big and so hard that they're hard to accomplish. And time limited. Think about what you could do this week. Think about what you could do today. It's a little bit about just taking a specific action. Just do it. And then assess how it went. And some things will work out better than others, but at least you'll be moving and you'll have tried something. I want to really focus on ways to widen your network and create new relationships. So one thing that I think is important to think about is whether you have leisure interests or hobbies where it might be possible to meet new people. So for example, if you're somebody that enjoys running, is there a running club in your area? If you're somebody who enjoys politics, is there a political club that might be a way to meet new people? A different way to go is to kind of scan through your network in your mind and think about other people you're already familiar with who might be open to forming a closer friendship. And it might just take a little bit more initiative on your part to reach out and ask them to do something, or to slow down and have a conversation with them. Most areas have a local support group or program for bipolar disorder that you could join. There may be ways to volunteer or take classes or meet people at your work. Many people meet others through community or fitness centers or clubs or through a spiritual community. Others find that it's worked very well for them to share a living space with others. So I think there are many different directions to go in how to broaden your network. And one thing to do is just sit for a minute and contemplate which of these might work best for you. Sometimes the issue is less about breadth and more about revamping your social network to promote a healthier relationship and lifestyle. So for example, if your friends are using drugs or drinking at a level that's uncomfortable, you might want to think hard about that, because those kinds of unhealthy behaviors can put you at risk for a mood episode. Sometimes it's a matter of finding people who are really well-informed supporters who live with a condition similar to yours or are trained by a mental health professional to provide support, because maybe they'll understand in a different way the kinds of health behaviors you're trying to enact to sustain your health and well-being. Another way that people become more engaged in their social network is to learn how to become a peer supporter and build the sense of connectedness with their community. Many support groups are quite eager to have new support group leaders, peer supporters, and they have great apprenticeship programs for how to begin to move in that direction. In all of this, you want to think about having a healthy balance. So sometimes when people are depressed, they kind of retreat and withdraw from social contact. It may feel like it takes too much energy. And what you might want to do is focus on finding small social connections that don't take too much energy or demand, and go ahead and schedule them in. Maybe call a friend and make sure they go see a movie with you on Friday night. On the other hand, too much social contact can be pretty exhausting and pretty overstimulating, increasing your risk for hypomania or mania. You don't want your social world to interfere with getting the right sleep, getting chances to relax, or just having the right balance. And sometimes it just takes some work to find the right balance for you. There are many different psychological therapies that have proven helpful for people living with bipolar disorder that are designed to help people rebuild and reestablish or even improve their social networks. I'm going to talk about just 3 approaches here. Family-focused therapy targets family interactions to help make relationships more supportive. We talked a little bit about overly critical family interactions and how difficult those can be for the person with bipolar disorder. Family-focused therapy helps to address the levels of conflict and arguments and help people find ways to have more peace with family members. Interpersonal and social rhythm therapy is designed to help people build and maintain healthy relationships, but also to recognize and end unhealthy ones. Both of those treatments have been shown to be very helpful for bipolar disorder and to have major influences in reducing the level of depression. There's another approach I just want to flag for you called assertiveness skills training. It wasn't developed specifically for bipolar disorder, but it's worked with a lot of people regardless of whether they had bipolar disorder or not. And the idea here is to learn new skills for sticking up for your rights and expressing what you need in relationships. You might want to think about this if you find yourself in passive-aggressive encounters, or in other words, situations where you find yourself feeling kind of resentful or bitter because people aren't listening to what you need or want. Similarly, it can help if in defending what you need or want, you end up having kind of more aggressive, conflictual interactions. It gives a way to have a more peaceful way to work through those difficult moments where what you want may not be what other people are listening to in the moment. So I think all 3 of these kind of psychological approaches can be extremely helpful in getting pointers and tips about how to make your social world a better place. Sometimes people find that they feel like, okay, I kind of know what to do, but socializing feels extremely difficult for me. And social skills training or cognitive behavioral therapy can help with that. So how does CBT help? It's designed for symptoms of mood and social anxiety. And it can really help challenge distorted and even false thinking patterns about yourself or others. So for example, if you find yourself being a kind of oversensitive to rejection or very worried about whether people are going to like you or overly focused on how you're doing in a moment of social interaction, CBT can be great. It can really help you challenge that. CBT also works to gradually schedule regularly scheduled activities, other healthy behaviors, and just make those routines a little bit more systematic in your life. So plenty of tools and resources out there. We've set up a website here for you that gives you more about these kinds of tools. Bipolarcaregiversorg has a lot of information about maintaining or rebuilding your relationship. It's directed towards supporters of people who live with bipolar disorder, but it gives concrete evidence-based tips. So we highly recommend this one. There's also a great website called BP Hope, which has some specific information about relationships in the bipolar trap. It's got an article by a person living with bipolar disorder specifically about maintaining relationships that we highly recommend. There's also a website called Bipolar Manifesto, which has information about how to maintain friendships and relationships with bipolar disorder. Here, what we want to point out is a really well-written article by an individual living with bipolar disorder on ways to keep long-term friendships and relationships with bipolar disorder, and it's based on their own personal experience, an extremely helpful resource. Help Guide also has some nice information about relationships, some advice for finding and keeping healthy relationships, including from advisors' perspective, such as a social worker and health counselor giving their tips. And then in a recent Atlantic article, there's a great discussion of Masters of Love, an enjoyable article based on a research study into the science of lasting relationships, putting a focus on kindness and generosity. You will see many more resources here at our Bipolar Wellness Center, bdwellness.com. We also have some tools there at our website called bdqol.com, which are about how to kind of just step back and think more broadly about how are you doing with your quality of life and what are the areas that are going well or less well for you. Okay. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, but I also want to thank the support and sponsorship of our many funders, most specifically the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. Thanks again for being here. I hope you find something that was helpful, and good luck with your next SMART game plan.
Thank you, Sheri, for that wonderful webinar. It's time now for the question and answer portion of the day. So let's make a start here, Sheri. The participant states, I have a problem with knowing when and how to disclose my diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Do you have any tips for me?
That's a great question. Let me just check. Can you hear me?
Yeah, the audio is good.
Okay, good. I think that's a really important question. I think that it is really nice to have some people in your life who understand that you're struggling with bipolar disorder and what that means, and those people can be important as you start to experience symptoms and helping you manage them well. On the other hand, one of the fears I often have for people I'm close to is how do they choose the right people to share that information with? Because sadly, not everybody's going to be as supportive and compassionate. So I usually think about taking this in steps. And one thing I like to do is the idea of kind of testing, is this person thoughtful, and do they have good attitudes about mental illness and psychological problems? And one way to do that is to just bring up the conversation generally. So you can do things like say, hey, I was just reading this recent book by Kay Jamison on her experiences of bipolar disorder, and it was fascinating. You're not revealing much about yourself, but you might learn a whole lot about how they think about bipolar disorder. So test the waters before you move forward. Also think about the idea that not everybody has to know. There are probably a few important people in your life that need to know. And beyond that, it's a very politically important question whether you, and personally important question, whether you want more people to know. Some people want a lot of people to know because they want to change attitudes. Other people want this not to be very public, and either of those is okay. But let's say you do decide to disclose. I think the other thing that's really important is to think about what's the message you are giving about this condition. The media does a terrible job describing this, and all too often we absorb those messages and we spit them right back out when we're talking about ourselves. And so think about a healthier message to give. I have a friend here who says that he explains it to people that he has bipolar disorder, which means that something at a chemical level is wrong with his own internal clock. And sometimes his clock runs too fast and he can be kind of racy and trying to tackle too much and too excited. And other times that clock seems to run too slow and he can have a really hard time mobilizing and getting the energy to do things. That's a very different way of kind of talking about this that's not going to scare people. The other thing to do, I think, is to give some message of hope and responsibility. So I think it's really important to say, this is something I'm managing. I've got a therapist. I've got a psychiatrist. I've learned a lot about it. For the most part, I'm figuring out ways to kind of take care of this. But I also know that sometimes there may be days where it affects how I feel, and so I thought I just wanted to share with you that sometimes that's likely to happen. So I think you can set the tone of how you disclose this to people in a way that takes some of the scariness away that people may have learned from the media. It kind of accepts the idea that you're still the person who's responsible for your health and that you're taking that seriously. And provides this in a way that just sort of calmly lets them have a very real discussion with you because you're expressing this as something that you're able to kind of put in perspective for them. You sometimes then have people who want to know even more, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that there's some great resources out there to help people understand more. So CREST.BD in particular is a real leading resource for giving very fair and careful information to people. There are some terrific autobiographies out there. There are books now written for kids. There are kind of self-help books written for families by David Miklowitz. So there are also other resources to bring in if a person wants that disclosure to have a lot more depth. I hope that answers a little bit about what you're asking, but let's talk if there's other pieces out of that people want to kind of focus on.
That's a rich answer to the question that you provided there, Sheri. Thank you. I really like the idea of developing, it almost sounds like kind of, a short elevator pitch that empowers you to describe your bipolar disorder on your own terms and to sort of have that ready for those encounters as and when they come up.
Absolutely. I think all too often people can present this as kind of a scary thing, and yet most people have had kind of some mood changes in their life. We've all had days of being sad. We've all had days of being excited. And so if you can put it in this framework that says, yeah, well, you know how sometimes you're a little sad, sometimes you're a little more excited. Well, maybe I vary more on that than other people. You take the edge off of it.
And normalize the process to a certain extent as well. Yeah, useful. Yeah. The next question asks, states, these tips for supporting relationships are all great, but when I'm in a severe depression, I can barely get out of bed. Do you have any suggestions for me when I'm in that state?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important part about managing all of this. So the first thing is to think about what's easiest. And sometimes that might just be a telephone call. Can you call an old familiar friend or a family member just to have something that reconnects you to people? Sometimes you're going to have the feeling like, oh, that's not going to go well, it's not going to be good, but I think one of the things to ask yourself is, okay, but is it going to be any worse than lying on the couch or lying in bed and living with the kind of negative thoughts that are running through my head? 99% of the time, it's going to be better than kind of sitting with just sad, sad thoughts in your head. So I really encourage people to do something, even if it's simple. The other thing I would say is try and make the social plans very simple, very low demand. Don't set yourself up in a situation where you feel like you have to be the sparkling hostess of a big dinner party. You can do something really simple, like ask a friend if they want to go see a movie. It'll get you out of the house. It'll get your mind off of your troubles. It'll give you a couple hours of some level of relief. My third piece of advice is to ask your friends to do a little more reach out. So when people are feeling down, it's hard for them to take the initiative. And I think it's really okay to say to people, you know what, I've been a little blue. I noticed that I'm having a hard time reaching out to people. It would mean the world to me if you could just give me a call and check in, or help me kind of make some plans. And, a good, true friend will often feel really wonderful about the idea that they then know something about how to support you through this. And many friends are relieved because they wouldn't have known how to read the fact that you're in withdrawal. They may think that that withdrawal is just about them, that, well, I guess they don't want to see me. And when they understand that this is just something about you're a little blue, it's harder to reach out, and that you would still love to hear from them, that can really build the relationship in a nice way. So those are three ideas, or something like three, but I'm sure there are others as well that maybe Erin wants to chime in, or if there are other questions about that, let us know.
Well, it sounds like some of the stuff you were referring to there is relying on the basic principles of cognitive behavior therapy, and the idea of making a simple phone call and the potential for that to impact your mood makes a lot of sense, as well as the idea of measuring that. So if you do take that step to reach out to reflect as well on, did it make a difference? Was it as hard as I thought it would be? Did it have a positive impact? And just a little bit of reflection on the results of that exercise.
I think that's a great idea. I know I was working with a woman once who said to me, there's absolutely nothing that would shake this terrible, terrible slump I'm in. And I said, okay, are you willing to test that? And in the middle of our session, I had her rate what her mood was in the moment, make a quick phone call to a friend, rate her mood, so that she could see if it actually just 5 minutes of connecting to somebody that she cared about out there in the world that was a trusted person did make a difference. And it sort of gave her the challenge she needed of that sense of hopelessness, that sometimes when you're so down and blue, it feels like nothing is possibly going to work. Well, guess what? A lot of times small things can make at least a small difference. And that's where you start.
Thank you. So the next question is about routine. The person states, I know that routine and body clocks and stability in body clocks are important for bipolar disorder. Do you think there's a role for routine and social life in terms of helping optimize quality of life?
Oh, I love this question. I think that's huge, and I think it comes in two forms. One is it's really important to protect your sleep schedule when you have bipolar disorder, and so you don't want to be doing the things where once a week, even though you're the person who usually goes to sleep at 10 o'clock to get up for work, once a week you stay until 3 in the morning. It's much harder for people with bipolar disorder to reset the clock after that kind of fluctuation. So I would say you want to be really careful not to have your social activities interfere with your sleep. But then the other thing is you do want to have some regular social activities, and you want to try and have those at times of the day that are kind of good for your social clock. So, for example, maybe one thing is that you make a plan to see a friend each day at the end of the workday for a couple minutes. If you work with somebody and you can make it a plan to stop by their office for 10 minutes, that's lovely. If you can make it a plan to exercise with somebody or go for a walk at the same time each day, that's also a really nice way to kind of combat what can easily happen with the highs and lows of feeling less like doing something in the moment. So I think scheduling social events and scheduling them at times that are not going to interfere with sleep is just a great, great way to help your well-being.
Thank you. The next question is around mania. The person states, you've talked a lot about depression and how to look after social support during times of depression, but what about during times of mania? Mania has created, has wreaked havoc on some of my social relationships.
Yeah, and we often see this, sadly. I think that this is a very hard process to come back from a mania where you may have said or done things that aren't your typical self, and to reconstruct and to rebuild. I think one of the pieces of advice I have for people is to start with those people in their life that they expect to be most compassionate or that they have some history with to build from. And I think being able to just say, I'm sorry if you've done something that you really regretted can go a long way. I never fail to be amazed by how much compassion people have once they understand that this is something that you may feel badly about. I think part of that apology can involve kind of the steps you're taking to get back your health and well-being. So maybe you had a mania and maybe that's renewed your focus on, okay, I'm going to do more to learn about how to take care of myself with this disorder. I think that's a really important message for your friends or family to hear if they felt as though things didn't go well during that manic episode. Sometimes when it's somebody that's really close to you, like let's say it's your partner who's really upset about things that happened, you can work with them about maybe the two of you in the future are going to need to work on catching this early on so that as the spiral upward happens, both of you catch it and work to improve access to kind of getting in touch with the doctor, but also protecting your lifestyle. So if you know that you're already a little bit high, maybe those are times to avoid really hyper-stimulating, public, socially exciting events that might tip the balance. And having a close person to you help work on a game plan around that, if they're going to be upfront and honest with you if they notice that you're already a little racy, and help you think about what are things to avoid on a day like that. That can really turn this around, because it's also a very, very powerful statement to your friends and family that you're going to do everything in your power to protect against bad things happening with this mania. So I think there's a lot of room for healing. A lot of times it's very overwhelming for people to start that process. So this goes back to SMART goals too. Choose one small, specific step you could take with a person that feels like the first, easiest person that you might approach, or somebody that's really meaningful for you to try and rebuild that relationship with. Start there. You may find that success in that area really helps you rethink, like, okay, you know what, that was well worth the investment and the hardship of approaching that person, having the dialogue. And it may inspire you to do more repairing with other relationships.
Yeah, some really sage advice there, Sheri. One of the things I've witnessed as well is that sometimes the things that we think are terribly embarrassing or shameful in terms of things that we've done in the past are often about our interpretations of that. And when we go to the point of saying to somebody, listen, you know, I'm really embarrassed about what happened there, you realize that as human beings, we're intrinsically quite self-centered. And sometimes what happens is the person says, oh, really? I really didn't notice that, or that wasn't a big deal for me. And often the shame and the embarrassment is more about our own perceptions of the event than the reality of what happened in that particular social interaction.
Yeah, I think that's very true, very true.
Well, it looks like those are all the questions that we have on the line today. If there's other stuff that crops up for you, please continue to tweet your questions at us, and we will answer them as we move forward through the rest of our webinar series. It's really wonderful to have had Sheri Johnson on the line today to share her considerable expertise on the topic of relationships and bipolar disorder. So thank you for joining us today, Sheri.
Oh, thank you all for being here. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you, Erin and Chandra, for inviting me to be a part of this.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody.